Please don't. A terrible offering. You really don't want to do this. I taste terrible.
Not today.
What?
Please.
Not today.
What?
Oh shoot! I think yeah, the audio went live on the freaking what's it called?
I think that made it better.
Second we started, yeah.
That was fun. That was fun.
Yeah.
It's a
it got all
Wednesday.
squeaky too because I always watch everything at 2x speed.
Yeah. That's amazing. Hey, internet. It's hey, Larry's Guts here. How about that? Perfect timing on this Wednesday, on this episode of the Mattriarchy, where we're here to talk about funny animals. But before we get into that, I would like to welcome tonight the Metal.
Hello.
Who's doing production for us. Thank you very much. We've got Twitless.
Who's on mute?
Who's on mute. But that's okay. Maybe something happened. We've got Larry. Thank you for showing up, man.
You're welcome.
And Cartoonicus.
Stay tuned.
In the chat, I have some explaining to do. I wrote before we went live that this is a test because I was trying to holler at Hutch in the chat and the thing wasn't letting me for whatever reason. And so I asked him to see if I could get a message through. But Dave says I didn't study, and that's fine because neither did we.
Well, speak for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, other than in the
and
way
you
that
know Twitless studied.
We've all been studying comics for years. The question to pose tonight is why don't we have funny animal comics anymore?
We don't.
I mean, what the heck happened to funny animal comics? Now, to explain myself, because you can still, I think they still make a Sonic the Hedgehog book, right? That's still out there being done. And occasionally you get your I mean, over in Europe, of course, it's all over the place with Mickey Mouse, but you can still sometimes get the Disney comics here in America, and somewhat. But back even when I was a kid, which that's a while ago, but not that long ago, it was every company had a line of funny animal comics: DC, Marvel, Dell, whatever. You get the Pink Panther, you get a Super Bunny, you get a Hoppy the Marvel Rabbit, right? They were all over the place, and you just don't. They're hard to come by unless you're looking for licensed stuff like My Little Pony or Sonic the Hedgehog. And is it just me, or is that crazy?
I think there's something to it. There was a time when it feels like children's material, either in comics or in animation, was specifically outed to use animals all the time. We have certainly moved on from that in many respects. And I suppose that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
And Dave has a good cromulent point on that.
Yeah, they're in the chat. The direct market killed comics for kids. I do think that's a big issue. And in fact, DC and Marvel have done several experiments through the years trying to get comic books into kids' hands that have largely not worked, except their Scholastic partnership, getting Squirrel Girl and Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur into Scholastic book fairs. Other than that.
The reason the Squirrel Girl doesn't count as a funny animal comic is because Squirrel Girl isn't funny.
So that seems like a really good place for me to stick a little advert in there. If you're interested in a genuinely funny animal-themed superhero comic, go check out idealcomics.net. We're uploading every Monday a little strip called Grab It, Rabbit Superhero. Go check it out. It's fun. Okay. Anyway. Available right now for the low price of nothing. So, did you know? I grew up. My first introduction to floppies was back in the mid '90s, reading DuckTales, reading Uncle Scrooge Adventures, reading Mickey Mouse, not knowing that Gladstone was reprinting the Carl Barks stories from the 40s and 50s. I had no idea. I was just like, hey, this is from that cartoon show I like. What about the rest of you guys? Were you guys big into funny animal books when you were little, or comic strips in the paper, or what's the story?
I grew up almost exclusively on Garfield.
My condolences.
Ouch.
I second that.
Double ouch.
I had this. Cartoonicus, you know my rant on Jim Davis.
Good night, kids.
I do, but it's
That's
nice
the show.
to ignore it.
Just kills it. Okay, no. So Cartoonicus, as somebody who grew up loving Garfield, which I also loved Garfield.
Past tense is the important part.
Yeah, I appreciate Garfield. I don't love Garfield. And there's anyway, Garfield's complicated. But what were your takeaways from loving Garfield as a kid?
Well, for one thing, I think I became a cat person, which also ticks Twitless off, so that's understandable.
Yes, Cartoonicus is a cat boy.
Not the anime kind.
That's funny because the Metal has a whole race of cat people in his comic.
I do. They're almost, except for one individual, exclusively cat girls, because why wouldn't they be?
Jim Tuner in the chat is joining into the Jim Davis conversation.
Strike all of you down. I think you're talking about Walt Disney.
Yeah. Anyhow, but yeah, so
does Jim Davis even draw anymore, or does he just get his legion of foreign workers to just photocopy Garfield in one of 10 poses, and then you just you just transfer it to the light box?
He is more of the writer at this point, but last I knew, he and an assistant would still do the preliminary sketches out to plot out the comic.
Yeah, plot out the table space and the one of 5 jokes that he recycles now.
Okay.
Sorry.
So here
next time on the War on Garfield.
So no, that's
I'm bitter because Garfield used to be so good, and Jim used to actually have genuine creativity.
Okay. Use that. Let's talk about that. Don't just sit there and rant.
I mean, Garfield without Garfield is funny.
Yeah, it's an indictment of what he became. It's what happens when you go full corporate. Sorry, Jim Tuner says I cut you off.
Back to the discussion of seeing Jim Davis's name in the mirror. If it's Walt Disney, he will drag you down to hell with him. So that's funny. And this is something that's actually very poignant to me personally.
I actually agree with this.
Is greater than Garfield. And that was the thing for me. I enjoyed Garfield quite a lot in the regular strips, but then when I started digging on Heathcliff, I was like, nah, that's a cat for me. I like Heathcliff.
Heathcliff is actually the perfect example of what you were talking about a second ago. I did grow up on that show.
Okay, so I'm going to end this. I'm going to end this entire conversation.
16 years old.
Pogo, mic drop.
Okay.
Pogo beats everything.
You are going to discuss something at some point in this live stream, are you not?
Yes. Well, of course, we have to get into that, but I've not read Pogo. So when we get done talking to Cartoonicus about Garfield, then we'll go ahead and ask Twitless about Pogo, and you can enlighten me because I've never read it. So, when it comes to Garfield, how did that impact your appreciation of comics?
Well, it certainly helped get me into being an artist in the first place. You might not notice it after years of practice and other influences, but there are some early influences from Garfield in my work, as well as the need to tell stories and the understanding of sequential art.
And that's
Um,
one of the things that I think is really interesting about the comic strip format itself is that it, while it is constraining, it also, once you get into working in that format or thinking about that format, it just pulls you into doing the most with it. I mean, there's a it begs experimentation and the boundaries like long to be pushed.
and Garfield is one of those things. It's a lot like Tintin, which I also grew up on, where you don't really necessarily get it as a kid. You go back to it as an adult, and suddenly you get all these jokes that totally went over your head, or that you understood in a completely different context back then. So I don't know about Twitless's story. For me, Garfield actually seasoned with age.
Interesting.
Maybe the one thing in my life that I can actually cling to with some nostalgia.
I've never heard anyone say that. I'm going to have to. I've got some Garfield collections that we picked up through the years that I haven't cracked in years. Maybe I have to read through them and think about that. So
It's an interesting journey, especially if you start from the beginning and you get to watch the whole, evolution of the comic from there.
Yeah. Well, and Twitless and I have talked before. He's of the affirmed opinion that there was tremendous amounts of evolution, and then it plateaued before falling off into oblivion. So, though both the great thing about it is you both could be right, and I love that. Oh yes, Windsor McKay is better than everyone else. That's true. Michael Hutch in the chat says, "I love the strips people did where they removed Garfield's thought balloons, which John cannot hear, resulting in one-sided conversations of an insane man."
So before we get too much further here, are we focusing more on funny animal comics or funny animal comic strips, or are we kind of treating them both on the same?
I think there's a lot to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover. And okay. I like to get a kind of a broad palette discussion and then narrow it back into the floppies.
Okay.
So I didn't discuss this with anybody except the title, so everybody is as lost and confused as I am. So
yeah,
does Marmaduke count as a funny animal comic?
Yeah, in many ways.
It count. Well, you'd have to put the. See, the problem there, as you well know, Larry, is that the word funny and the word Marmaduke.
Oh! Folks, we're just going to rename this strip Twitless Rags on Comics.
Twitless's hot takes.
I'm here for it.
Because
I agree with half of them so far.
I was going to say, is saying that Marmaduke is not a funny comic, is that really a hot take? I'm pretty sure that's like a normal take. It's like a meme at this point that Marmaduke is not funny.
Deep frozen. That's what it is.
Considering that we have a regular guest on here, literally called #1 Marmaduke fan.
It was a joke.
That's irony. He does that ironic.
That's a joke. Yeah, someone called #1 Marmaduke fan. That's exactly the joke. Inside reference that I'm not going to bother explaining right now. But he really would not be offended at this conversation.
Yeah, that goes back to the ye old days of CG.
Yeah. Back to the early days, 2018 days.
Pearls Before Swine can be funny, yeah.
Pearls Before Swine could come. And I would say one of the things that when we're talking about funny animal comics, it's the idea that it features an animal and the animal is the protagonist and the intention of it is humor, right? So things like, and that's like Sonic in itself, it kind of rides that line, right? Because there's a lot of serious themes that go on in it, yet we still have cartoon action that makes it
the early
funny.
Issues, the early run of Sonic would fit that to would fit that pretty much
to
a
a
T.
Pure humor. Even though the cartoon it was based off was actually an action show.
And action and comedy can be, together. I mean, Peter David's Young Justice, it's 100% action, 100% comedy. So, If Sonic counts as an animal, Archie Sonic is the last great funny animal comic. And that I think that's a very possible position on that.
I would actually counter that with I still think that Walt Disney comics, although I don't know how funny but some of them ride the line as well. But they're essentially like just a modern day Tintin in some ways. But
do any of them get published? You said they do in Europe apparently, but
IDW I think still does some.
Really?
Yeah, and I know like they did Darkwing Duck recently. So which is interesting because like Cartoonicus knows how much I will rag on. I'll rag on Disney way more than I'll rag on Garfield.
Well, and I mean, if I was still supporting Disney, I'd love to go and check those out.
But yeah, I was just gonna say that like the one thing that I remember, the one piece of content that I found genuine creativity in, and I was like, this is actually like really good, and I want to keep reading it. It's the Walt Disney comics. The Mickey Mouse comics are great. All the Duck books are great, and it's basically all the charm and love that and adventure that you get out of like a Tintin comic. Very wholesome.
With the IDW books, I'm not sure that they're actually like Disney's actually making them. I think that they actually may be licensed, which is the situation that you have in Europe, where there actually are several companies in different countries that have localized licenses, and so like I think it's Finland, the Finnish Mickey Mouse comics aren't reprinted regularly anywhere else in the world, and they haven't been since like the 70s. They're like unique. I think it's Finland. They're unique to their market. I'm just like, well, that's wild. But they have to meet with
something. Pardon me. Here's something that came to me when you came up with this topic. Funny animal comics stopped being a major thing with the floppies once web comics became a major medium, and funny animal comics kind of were a perfect niche for web comics.
You just blew my like big revelation I was going to have at the end of this stream. Just so you know.
That's how it goes. You can't plan to have big revelations. You can't script it. I think what you meant to say is you stole my thunder because
2 hours of work down the drain.
Yeah, so he's been like, okay, I'm gonna trick them into a thesis statement. It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
But
that's why I volunteered.
If you would like to show my screen share here, I will give you a few examples. If I
can't find your screen share. I'm not seeing it.
I'm about to put it up here.
Oh, okay. Without explaining why I can't see it.
I'm surprised no one's mentioned Calvin and Hobbes yet. They deserve a real special mention.
Oh, that's an interesting choice, considering that Hobbes isn't well. You can
no, that's never been settled. Bill Watterson himself said it's meant to be ambiguous. That is where he drew the line. That's where I sit on it.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. So yeah, I myself have found many a webcomic that I enjoy that cover many different types of artwork, all dealing with animals, all different kinds of world building. This one is called Commander Kitty. It's basically Star Trek if it were done with cats. We have the ever famous and infamous Bittersweet Candy Bowl, which has spent, 20 years, I think, perfecting its art.
I've never even heard of it.
Oh, this goes all the way back to the days of, oh my gosh, that's horrendous. And has gone through so many changes over the years. It's insane. They must have like 1,000, maybe 2,000 pages at this point. There's of course House Pets, which is probably one of the closest to furry art you're going to get. And then, of course, if none of those pique your fancy, then there's always mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds of Sonic fan characters. Fan comics, excuse me.
Are you serious? You even went to DeviantArt and you skipped over the most important Sonic fan comic of all time?
I chose Sonic the Comic.
No, oh my god, I can't believe you.
Chris
How are you
Chan.
doing this
Talking
to
about
us?
Tails.
Hey, are you
Goes
talking
to
about a trip to Quickville?
No, I'm talking about the one
Chris
that.
Chan.
Oh,
Are you
I'll
serious?
get it up. Yes, yes.
Are you
you're
nuts? Are
right.
you mad?
Here we go.
Give me a
Here we
second.
go.
I'll get it up. I'll get it
There
up
is
here.
nothing funny about furry comics. They are animal
You're right.
comics, not funny
I-
animal comics.
That
That's
was
a-
dumb of me.
Yeah, it was. I can't believe you.
This is an in joke, people. There's
Oh,
no way
it's
you
his own
would be able to
stuff.
guess. Yeah.
This is the first comic that Taylor and I ever did.
Is it an old stuff? Yes. Here we go. Oh,
I
I
wrote
try to
this
forget
script
this
on-
thing exists.
I wrote this script on notebook paper.
Oh wow.
And I drew it while working at a security table at a church.
Huh. Well, that's
Yeah.
cool.
This turned out to be what, a 50-page comic, I think, that was supposed to be issue number 1.
That's
That's
amazing.
where we finished.
And,
we did a whole first issue and everything.
It's
So what did
cringy.
It's cringy as hell.
particularly my old artwork.
And well,
Almost
you know,
looks like it was done in GIMP.
It's
No,
very
it was done in a very early. Actually, it was before I even had Photoshop. It was Adobe Photo Deluxe. If anybody's ever even heard of that.
This is about it was about as low tech as you could get. I would write the script on notebook paper, hand it to Taylor, and then he would use ancient
Yeah.
Adobe products.
I think Jim's found out the truth here.
Yeah, we're all Chris Chan on the inside. Yeah. What's interesting because like this is why it's funny it's important to say, oh, my old fan art was cringe. But fan art is the gateway drug to independent creation.
Mhm.
We got to the end of this issue, and then we were thinking about like the next issue, and then suddenly we were like, why are we spending all this time, effort, and energy on something we could never ever profit from or get real credit from? Why don't we come up with our own property? But in order to get to that point, you got to start somewhere. Most people start with fan fiction. So as much as fan fiction is cringe and everything, it's really a very important formative step in your creative process.
Well, on that note, Twitless, here you go.
Oh my gosh, get that off the screen.
Fan
I
art
wrote
is
a
the
song
drug-
for it too.
Oh joy! Fan art is the drug to indie creation, except for Chris Chan. I don't think it's just Chris Chan. I think a lot of people have found themselves fixated on the fan aspects of their own creation, or the things that they've created within fan fiction. And I think that's why like a lot of people get crazy about you see those communities of shippers online that get really
definitely
emotionally
drunk.
mad when for years and years and years. And this is one of the things that's so frustrating to me. For years and years and years, people would just go like frothing at the mouth with this fan fiction about how Tim was Asian and gay, and Tim Drake, Robin, and it's like, guys, come on! You've not read the comic? Just let it go, man. But then, of course, DC had to make him,
That's the dark side of fan fiction, is when the fan fiction creators get in control of the actual mainstream properties, and then they can make their fan fiction reality. That's the dark side of fan fiction.
I thought the dark side was going to fanfiction.net.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh God,
Well,
no.
Right. Well, that is the dark side, because it basically flips and becomes the actual fiction. It's no longer
and
fan
I don't think
fiction.
that's necessarily true, because you get people like Roy Thomas and Jim Shooter that were writing fan fiction in zines and articles in zines and ended up being these movers and shakers in Marvel and DC.
I don't think Jim Shooter
because of the quality
classifies
of their work.
as a fan fiction. He literally just read comics for a year and then just sent scripts in and got them accepted on his first try.
It was a little more involved than that. It involved a lot of face-to-face meetings with the DC staff and all that other kind of stuff. Because he was living in New York at the time, so. But
he was in Philadelphia.
Yeah, he was in
that's
Philadelphia.
right, he was in Philadelphia, right?
I only know this because I just watched him recount this story.
Well,
Him and Mort.
Yeah. But yeah, that's I mean, it was a similar situation with Roy Thomas, where Roy was living in Ohio or whatever, but was constantly putting out, articles and what ifs and all kinds of stuff, and that got enough press that he got to know some, and writing letters and got to know the guys in New York just by reputation, and they went from there. So.
I'm fairly certain that there's probably a gift waiting in your notification.
I just saw that. Saw that.
So yeah, we're drifting off topic here. Back to the founding animal comics. I don't think did we go around the panel, get everybody's like their
no, we did not.
Their experience. Yeah.
We haven't asked Larry about it yet.
I mean, I'm going to be vanilla. The Matrix of Heathcliff, Garfield. What was the one where there was that? Those were the ones for comics for me, and I got into the Donald Duck Disney comics later when everybody told me that, all this Donald Duck stuff you're seeing on DuckTales was actually sourced from comics originally.
Right. That's
and I was like,
that
that's neat.
Something that Don Rosa is very happy to remind you of at any convention he's at. he has his own custom made sign he puts out. He sets it in front of his table and it says, "Hey, all of you DuckTales plebes," I might be slightly paraphrasing the sign. All you DuckTales plebes, the show you're watching is very loosely based on my work. So stop asking me about it.
I mean, I would prefer the sign if it said, "Hey, DuckTales plebes."
That would be amazing.
Uncle Scrooge is a good series, though. I think more people should read it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah, Tony, it is. Yeah, that's like I said. If you go to a convention, you see Don Rosa. He's very happy to point that out. But the work he's done, obviously Carl Barks and so on. The shows have strip mined a lot of that.
Yes, my favorite character.
The original
technically
Funny
did start
Animal
out
too.
as a comic for the first 2 years before it became an animation.
Yeah,
Love
before Don Rosa, it was Carl Barks who created Scrooge McDuck and created the Junior Woodchucks and a bunch of other stuff. So I mean, there's
Barks, Barks was the lore master. He established all of these lore things that other people. He wrote the whole Bible on. Here's did he do by a yearly basis? Here's where Uncle Scrooge was in 1918.
Well, I think he ended up doing it because they started when they did the Klondike Adventure. They suddenly had so many loose threads in it. I think he had to nail it down.
But just so you guys know, this character right here is the most important character in all of Funny Animal history because Felix inspired Mickey and Mickey inspired Sonic.
I'm going to have to stop you there because there's actually one more that we have to remember that is probably just as important.
Well, there are so many. I mean, there's lots of other little ones in there.
No, Crazy Cat does not count as little.
No, I'm saying on the road there of.
See, we want to go real far
Felix
back.
inspired a lot of stuff. Sullivan did tremendous work with creating that character.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying. I think Twitless's point is you probably wouldn't have Felix without Crazy Cat.
That's what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a fair argument. The thing that Felix did is he jumped the boundary from because Crazy Cat was firmly in the newspaper strips, and there was some other floppies that reprints and stuff that existed, but none of them had the staying power that the newspaper had in that. So I think you're looking at that the torch was definitely passed, despite the fact that and I'm going to forget the dude's name at the minute, but what they did with Crazy Cat was visionary in so many ways. Harriman, yeah. I mean, he did stuff in Crazy Cat in the 20s that people in other realms of comics didn't pick up on until the 70s. So, or didn't.
That being said, I've never really gotten into Crazy Cat. There's just something about it that just I don't get very well. So I understand its significance, but it's not my go-to.
It's an older style of comedy.
Well, and I mean, part of it is like it's not meant to be read like through a book of it, right? Like it's 1 page, 2 page gags at the most.
Right.
So it doesn't. There's no coherent narrative that flows from issue to issue or anything else.
Speaking of
It's-
coherency, it could break down in a single page, at least for me. Like I get to
Well,
the
yeah,
end, I'm like, what did I get out of this?
Well, there was definitely some of that. I mean, there was some abstraction that's part of the thing. But yeah,
and it should
you
also
should
be
definitely go.
recognized that at that time, especially before Otto Mesmer arrived on the scene and wowed everybody with animation, that at that time cartoons were a bit more looked down on than they have through really. I mean, even though even today they're somewhat looked down on, but more probably than any other time in history. You can bet that these artists would have probably had a bit of a bite to them, a kind of
And like cartoons,
basically middle finger they'd be giving anyone who didn't want to read this comic. And I think that
cartoons at the time, they were looked down on unless they weren't, right? if you were drawing, I mean, if you were McCrae, right, doing Little Nemo, right? I mean, that was you'd made it. If the folks that
I was about to say Winsor McKay was a big animation pioneer as well.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. But I'm just saying, like, even the stuff that, I mean, like, he got a full page, right? The Harrimans with Crazy Cats, with the I'm trying to remember right now. My brain's skipping out of me, but there were Hogan's Alley, right? There were a few of those big name strips that were like dominant within and respected within. I mean, like, you have a New Yorker because Hogan's Alley and Crazy Cat existed, right? In a lot of ways. And so there was very two branches of cartooning. There were these highfalutin New York cartoonists, and then there were all the little scrubs that were making, funny page stuff. And so that I mean, I think that's I think that's definitely an aspect of it. So, but anyway, Seeger's Popeye. Great observations from the chat. Little Nemo was great before other things were great. Yes.
Yeah, I like Little Nemo.
So
I have
good.
a fascination with the early creation of Popeye, actually, I must admit.
Yeah.
I'm convinced there's a massive amount of philosophy that most people, or at least most kids, at least, when you're watching the cartoons and stuff, are never going to pick up on. This was so much more a mature comic than anyone who's just watched the cartoons would ever expect.
Well, let's we're gonna say we're gonna spin this into a discussion of like the entire comic medium.
We're gonna risk that all night long.
I think it would be important. I'm going to go ahead and just put a pin in this here and say we should have a good Popeye discussion.
I think that would
coming
be
up here in 2023.
Yeah,
I think that's definitely a thing that has to happen, and we'll have to get Carl Toons, Mr. Carl Pencilman, on here because she's a huge Popeye fan as well as having some of the tastiest Popeye style artwork that I've seen anyone draw. So,
nice.
So that'll be a good thing.
Popeye pickle.
Maybe. Who knows?
Or it could be a pickle-shaped thing of spinach.
It could be. Who knows what Mrs. H will decide to draw? So.
You can't finish the hand.
I had another thought that came immediately after the webcomic thought.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a lot about the newspaper comics, which newspaper comics had funny animal stuff more than the floppies in the Americas. What role do you guys think erotic/porn comics played in this, and how they tended to be more comfortable with animals?
I try not to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm saying we're gonna have to address that, but I think we're gonna put a pin in that for a second, because once again, one of the things you got to look at is like funny animals were still super popular throughout, even in the 80s, because like Heathcliff had a long running comic. The Harvey comics were, some of them were, and Harvey style comics, they're not exactly Funny Animal, but they have a similar lineage with the way the jokes are being told. So I think they've been mentioning that it existed. There was a couple of Funny Animal titles that Marvel was publishing in their Star line. One of them was Heathcliff. When they were still out there, Gold Key and Western were both had Funny Animal comics.
Yeah, okay. So I was just about to say, like, I just read some material to I think that is useful for this.
So my point is saying is that before, say, 82, 83, you wouldn't find a rack in any grocery store or mini mart that didn't have a Funny Animal title in it, whether it was a licensed title, whether it was Hanna-Barbera stuff, whether it was, and some of those were reprints and whatever, but still they were there. Or whether they were the Disney stuff, you wouldn't find a rack that didn't have those, even if most of the titles there were your DC and your Marvel superhero stuff.
Right. So like the thing though that I think there's a couple of factors here. So the material that I was read kind of dated some of the problems in the 60s. So around that time, Western and Dell ended up they were huge. And they were so big that they kind of they did something that other comic book companies didn't do, and they raised their prices by 3 cents over what their competitors essentially were charging, because they had a lot of success selling, and by 3 cents, we're talking about the difference between 12 cents and 15 cents. And they had a lot of success selling 25-cent, large collection kind of comics. So they said, it's fine. If we can make a lot of money on a 25-cent comic, we make plenty of money on a 15-cent comic. Mm-hmm. And that difference of 3 cents at the time with kids, because again, it was kids largely buying those Funny Animal comics, their sales cratered.
And when was that?
So this is around 61, 62.
Okay.
This was when right as Western and Dell broke their alliance. And so from what I'm reading, that broke their kind of dominance that they had. And so obviously they still existed. The Funny Animal comics, from them and others still existed, but they didn't have the same predominance that they had in the past. I'm also imagining that at the same time, it wasn't just that 3 cent increase. It was also the rise of the thing, that the big elephant in the room, which is the rise of television, right? And so not only is this comic becoming, the 3 cent difference, right? But you also have the fact that kids can now get the Funny Animal on TV. So you put those two things together, and that if we're asking the question of what killed the Funny Animal comic, I would say that those two things definitely put at least a couple of nails in that coffin.
Well,
however,
I think
you go ahead. I'll back up.
Okay. I was going to say also the other thing to look at too is Marvel and DC. DC had already been a contender, right? But that would have been about the time that Marvel started getting their distribution through DC, and then you're gonna so then they became a big market force at that point too. Because of the wider distribution that Marvel was available to, and even though they had a limit to what they could actually get out, because DC was limiting the numbers of titles that they could produce through their contract, but they still were getting out to a wider market, and a portion of the Funny Animal market would have been aging into superhero comics, which were becoming ascendant, as well as both DC and Marvel trying out different genre stuff that bringing back new different genre stuff that had kind of gone through the wayside in the mid 50s. So there's a lot of competition for those little eyeballs.
Here's what I was going to say is that you're talking about cartoons and coming out on TV in the 60s. Actually, really 50s even. But here's the funny thing about that, though. And I've been thinking about how there are really 3 major names that pop up as far as what cartoon animals throughout most of the history of both comics and animation. Those are in succession Disney with the Mickey Mouse universe, Looney Tunes, and then Hanna-Barbera. And the thing I noticed about all three of these is not only are they become massive names that are still going to this day, but all three of these created entire universes of all anthropomorphic animals, right? With these massive casts of characters. And as a result, you don't just get TV and animation, you got a lot of comics on the side. So I'm having trouble believing that the cartoons necessarily automatically killed the comics, because they were at the same time should have been generating those comics for a good long while.
Right. So I think here's the missing piece of the puzzle, right? So funny animal comics were still widely produced, even though we're looking at competition factors from the 70s through the 60s and 70s. But funny animals were widely produced up through the late 80s, right? So what is it that's different between the mid 60s and the 70s and the late 80s?
Let the
Cable
audience put in
television.
their votes.
Yeah, that's true. We could have had a poll, but I already
So in
spoiled
the late
answer.
'80s, what funny animal comic was there that wasn't a already established IP that you can think of?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Wasn't it?
I don't think there was one.
Because I think the '60s was where new funny animal comic IP went to die within mainstream comic books.
Oh, actually, you know what? You want to know what wasn't a previous major IP? Garfield.
Well, I mean,
It came out in like 1979.
That's
so,
true.
It was an
That's
80s
true.
comic.
That's true.
So
And
part of my thesis that I have here is that the decline is a bias issue. That artists who got into comics of a certain generation didn't want to do funny animal comics because those was for kids. Those weren't, serious and cool and awesome. Or those are things you do in the comic strip, or those are things you do in the cartoons, or those are things you do in porn comics.
right.
So the death of the funny animal comic is a byproduct of a change in the people who create comics. But if you see in the private chat there, I have a link that argues that the funny animal comics are doing just fine.
Yeah.
And is it safe to look at?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's 100% safe to look at.
I mean, you see it in your stores all the time.
Oh yeah. It's all over the place. It's
the world
is
one of the best-selling comic books today.
Let me present here.
Oh, okay. Not at all what I was expecting. I totally misread that.
Yeah.
I mean, at least in our region, this is number one. So, like, I'm sure most people have seen it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a really good point. It is a new property. It's marketed where kids buy comics, and this is one thing that Jim's mentioned in the chat several times, that kids just aren't buying comics like they used to in the way they used to because they're not available like they used to. Hutch mentioned that earlier in the chat too. Is like you can't just go. Kids waiting in line to check out at the Walmart aren't asking their mom to buy them comics, but they are going to the book section and asking to buy this. Gotcha. And these are being taken to kids at the school fairs, like we were talking about with Squirrel Girl, right? That Dave Pilkey has cracked into something that was missing in mainstream comics for young kids, comics for young boys, and something that else is missing is funny animal books. So he's got this intersection of material, and I think that's a really good point. Larry, is that we do have funny animal books that are available and popular. So why is it that DC and Marvel aren't acting this out?
Does anything make sense about what DC and Marvel do anymore?
Oh,
Fair point.
that's easy. That's easy. DC and Marvel's core audience is 40-plus-year-olds, but they want it to be 20-plus-year-olds when it should actually be 12-plus-year-olds.
I can easily tell you what's going on with Marvel and DC. They're not real businesses. Like it's most of what you most a
Boy,
real
is that
business.
true.
Well, no, I'm not even saying that to be mean. I'm saying the
No,
fact
no,
that
I know. I think I know exactly what you're
if
about.
you have a business, right, and it sells a product, and that product, sells well, business goes good, sells badly, business goes out of business. Imagine a business that has no mechanism for accountability because it's merely a cog in a much larger machine.
Yeah.
And that's what you have with Marvel and DC. I've said this multiple times.
Yeah.
Mainstream comic book industry in America is a fake industry. It doesn't exist.
Well, at
That's
least
why
the
that's why
superhero.
everything doesn't make sense.
Well, and I mean,
Yeah,
and
it's just an IP
even,
farm.
yeah.
even to the extent that it does exist, right, which is limited, it exists as and for a few years, Marvel was a loss leader for Disney in the same way that YouTube was a loss leader for Google. It was a tax write-off, right? Now, Google is since 2016, I think they're making money again, but they're not making keep doors open money. They're making advertising money, right? They exist as an advertising wing for other Marvel products, and so if you if you can sell your ad flyers and turn a 50-cent profit, well then hey, that's great. You don't have to worry about it. You're in the black because all you're doing is you're propping up the next big tentpole movie, and
The cost of a trade paperback run of any comic book character is roughly what a major studio would pay for a spec script for a movie or TV show.
Yep.
And Marvel did a promotional deal with the New York Jets of all things and the Hulk like a year or two ago. They made more money off of that than they had made on Hulk comic books in like 5 years.
That's sad. But I mean, once again, Disney, and I'm not going to say they're even Disney and AT&T both. I'm not going to say wrongly about it. They consider the paper comic to be part of their advertising budget, and why not? Right? So
And
that's
this isn't even a new thing.
and it hasn't been.
Superman merch always made more money than Superman comics.
That's true. That's true.
So is the real issue that not that Marvel and DC killed funny animal comics, but that superhero comics killed nearly every other type of comic?
Well, and I think they subsumed them at least. You look even to like the not superhero comics that Vertigo was producing back in the early 90s, right? But many of them still tangentially take place within a superhero universe, right? Like Sandman, not a superhero book. In fact, I recently read through Sandman #1 again just for kicks. And it's 100% not a superhero comic, but it is inextricable from the DC universe, right? It exists within a superhero universe, which, appeals to me because I likewise write stories that are not superhero stories entirely that take place in a superhero universe, right? So I was just going back and editing a murder mystery last week. So, yeah, so I get that. But that is, I think that's definitely part of it. And funny animal books don't really connect in that paradigm, right? Although I think I may have pulled it off. So go check out idealcomics.net and check it out. Grab it, the rabbit superhero. Okay.
So for what is the reason then that among all these superhero comics, one of those outliers happens to be a cartoon duck?
You mean Howard the Duck?
Yes.
Oh man. Okay. That's a really good question, and that can bring us into other aspects about what may have killed funny animal comics for the larger audience. The one of the things about, and your guys might have to remind me because I cannot remember the dude's name right now, who created Howard the Duck, but Howard the Duck was comics with an X inspired pastiche of both funny animal books and superhero comics, and so it was intentionally done to poke its eye in the very thing that it was in the middle of, right? So it was like what Peter David was doing with She-Hulk, where they're like, okay, we're doing a superhero book about a sexy girl, and so we're going to make these jokes about it, but she's in on the jokes just like the fans are in on the jokes, and that's the sort of thing. With Howard the Duck, it was we all love comics, but comics are sort of silly, but we know that they're silly, and we love them because they're silly. So I'm going to make this transgressive sci-fi story taking place within this silly universe of all the silly things that we love for being silly. And so it was a send up and a love letter. It was like a roast of the Marvel universe. But it was never meant to be like a tentpole concept, but it still fits into all of that. But it took on the idea, and this I guess is kind of the bridging idea, is it was an intentionally, knowingly transgressive pastiche of all of the genres that are involved in that. And that's kind of, I think, one of the things that gets into sort of, in some ways, the breakdown of why people weren't making new funny animal properties, or we're taking things like Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew and just butchering them, trying to make them hyper serious. Why were they doing that? Because instead of doing what Steve Gerber, I remembered what Steve Gerber did and said, I love all of this stuff and I'm making the jokes because I love them. They said, well, we're gonna go a different direction because we're a little embarrassed by how silly it is.
I gotcha.
Oh, hey, Steve, Tuner, I was looking over my glasses and Tuner points out that it was Gerber. I couldn't remember the dude's name. But there it goes.
So basically, Howard the Duck was the American version of Judge Dredd.
A little bit, without so much hyper violence.
I was gonna say, I don't know if I'd say Judge Dredd. I have mixed feelings about Howard the Duck. I kind of love it, and I also kind of go, why is this in Marvel? It's like that's essentially where I fall on it. It's brilliant stuff. I remember, oh gosh, there's an early villain who's basically like an actuator or something, and he's like this like evil wizard, but he basically just like does taxes. And I actually drew on that for a character in Super School because it was really funny. So really funny stuff, but it's like it doesn't, to me, it's like getting peanut butter and caviar. When you're mixing it with Marvel, it's like it's just the flavors don't mix for me.
Well, and I think there's ways of making it work well, and I think like the books of magic are a really good example of somebody doing it well, of taking these elements that are part of a superhero universe, but not leaning too far in either direction, and also paying homage to both those things. I think that the Marvel horror in the 70s, Blade, Tomb of Dracula, they take place within this other context, but it's not overbearing with it all. And I think that like we're talking about Young Justice earlier. Young Justice is a great example of where it's a totally silly book, but it's still genuine action, and it still takes place in this greater universe, and it still acknowledges the conceits of the different genres. And I think that's one thing that people don't do right now.
When did Spider-Ham come out?
60s and 70s.
So that was a thing before the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was a whole Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Ham had a series in the 80s that lasted, I want to say 36 issues, but that's mostly guessing.
Jim Tuner's got my back here. Pro Rata, the villainous accountant, which I completely lifted for Algebron, our evil math teacher for Super School.
So what if Disney Plus created a show that is a crossover between Spider Ham, Howard the Duck, and Rocket Raccoon?
Disney would never do that with Howard the Duck because it's making fun of Donald. It's expressly making fun of Donald.
Yes.
And Disney would be uncomfortable with that.
And,
well, but they did include him in the NCBU.
Yeah. But part of Howard the Duck's thing, if you really let Howard the Duck talk, Howard the Duck is profane. So I don't think it would be. I know you know, but I'm just saying I don't think it would be a good business move to put Howard the Duck into anything that's marketed toward
I know what you mean. Yeah.
overtly toward children. I mean, it's one
I
thing.
recognize that there's probably a reason he has only showed up in one post-credit scene and an Easter egg.
He also smokes, and that's literally cancer to most corporate media. Oh my gosh, he's got a cigar! Ah,
that's literally cancer to the human body.
That was the joke I made.
It's literally potential cancer.
Besides, it's Disney Plus. If to answer your question, if they made it, it would suck.
I didn't say I was going to watch it.
So, yeah. So, the other thing I think about it is, so we have and somebody mentioned Bucky O'Hare as an 80s fuzzy animal property, and that's a very good observation as well. I had forgotten about Bucky O'Hare. But so we have this outgrowth of funny animal books that aren't funny overtly, like Howard the Duck is not really a funny animal book, although it plays on those pastiches. The Aardvark book, Cerebus the Aardvark, right, is not a funny animal book, but it plays on funny animal stuff, right? Rocket Raccoon is not a funny animal character, but he looks like a funny animal character, right?
And he's funny.
He's funny, but he's not a funny animal funny, right? So you've got a few properties. You've got Sonic, right? That has had some staying power, and I would agree. I think Sonic's probably the last legitimate funny animal, other than Dogman, right? But I think another aspect that's kind of moved the market away from it, in addition to the fact that kids aren't buying floppies, which is another huge aspect of all of that. But I think there's, like I mentioned, the embarrassment factor for some creators, because they don't want to be looked at. They don't want to distance the idea of the comic book from the funny papers, right? All that. But I think the other thing that I think we have to address, I don't think we can address the question here without acknowledging the impact and the growing knowledge in the public mind of furries.
All right, I knew we were going there eventually.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
It is the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Can we
Literally?
Yeah.
Can we discuss this topic in large and not bring up that?
No, that's why I said I knew we were going there eventually. But here's the thing, and this is why it's such a problem in general. There are as many definitions as to what the word furry means as there are people who understand the term.
Yeah, that's like saying there's as many definitions of the word queer. What it is when you see it.
Well,
it absolutely goes by the I'll know when I see it. But the result is
something more practical.
I mean, there are people who would call my work furry. There are people who would call Bugs Bunny furry. I think we all.
Well, those people are idiots.
Well, and that's the point. There's always going to be an argument. There's going to be a concept over whether they're costumes, over whether it's sexual. I know Christians who are furries. I know people who would absolutely say that furries are of the devil. So if we're going to have
they are the devil. Let's be real.
of trying to nail this down, we have to get one thing straight, and that is that there are not one, but two very separate definitions of the word.
At least.
Let's clarify. No. Two.
I got to interrupt you for a second, because Justin has pointed out something in the chat that is a grave oversight on my part, and I am sad. I'm ashamed. I'm guilty for not mentioning Usagi Yojimbo as a newer furry character. I mean, not furry, as a newer funny animal book. But I mean, Usagi
funny.
It uses the cartoon animal type. Right, where there are definitely cartoon animals. Humor is a factor in the stories, even
I
though
wouldn't
it's
call it
not
a funny animal
dominant
comic.
factor.
Let me put it this way:
I would classify
it's
it as
an
something else.
animal universe.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, it's
kind of what most of this is that we're talking about.
Because at that point, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like, and I think we're getting, and then like the umbrella is getting a little large for my for my taste.
I have to bring it up. I mean, I know we can nitpick about it a little bit, but
Sure.
I think you have to mention that Sakai's mastery of the comic form for telling serious stories and humorous stories. He's a master cartoonist, and if you haven't been
Yeah, he's
reading
great.
his
He's fantastic.
Eugene
Go
Doe,
read him. if
go
you
read it
haven't.
now.
Yeah.
Do it now.
So let me kind of help focus on this whole furry thing. Fritz the cat.
Can I finish what I was
Go
going to say?
ahead.
Though,
Sorry.
is that there are two specifically different definitions of what we'd call a furry noun. One is, and this is important, a human being in reality, living person, who engages in a certain type of fandom. You can define that fandom as whatever you want, but understand we're talking about the person, like a brony, talking about themselves as a furry as part of the fandom. Definition number 2 is referring to the exact opposite, the artistic rendering of a fictional character, usually in animal form, that is being referred to as furry artwork. I think obviously for the purposes of this conversation tonight, that is what we're focusing on. So I bring this up because all the time people will try to pull out what they consider furries are supposed to be based on, they'll basically be pulling from one and putting it on the other. And I think it's kind of important to nail down the artistic
I think there
aspect
is a
of this here.
big overlap aesthetically between the two, though, because
There can be,
for
I don't think
furry, I don't think it because like anthropomorphic stuff isn't inherently furry. There is a certain level of cartoonism to it. You're not actually trying like anytime you see furry art or even like the mascot outfits that people wear, they're not trying to look like the animal. They look like this weird caricature of the animal, even in the art itself.
And that's
no,
part
okay.
of the "I'll know it when I see it"
No,
thing. It's
here's
basically
the
new
here's the
anime.
real elephant in the room. Furry is when anthropomorphization crosses the line into sexual material.
Now, see, again, that is the kind of thing that some people are going to agree on, some people aren't.
That doesn't matter. That's
I'm
what
trying
that's
to
what
keep
it that's
that
what
out
it
of-
that's what it is. That's the only definition that actually matters. The rest of it is just
Every
the rest of
person
this
will
is just
have their own.
aesthetic. The rest of this is just aesthetic taste. The definition that matters, the one that matters to anyone who really cares, is when this becomes sexual. And the people who flirt with that line are maybe like they're often playing like semantic games with you, and it's all just a bunch of gaslighting, which is just covering for the fact that there is a line. It may be hard to objectively paint where it is, but you know it when you see it. And the line is that when an anthropomorphization becomes sexual, either in the mind of the creator, the mind of the person consuming it, and that's when things become very disturbing very quickly.
Whether that is
and
the case or not,
I think part of that though comes down to I think the reason that is germane, because I wouldn't say that's the definition that matters, but I think that is the definition that matters for this section of the conversation. Right? Because nobody
maybe.
Okay, when I was a child, I went to Halloween dressed as Tom one year and Jerry another year. And I never once believed that I was in fact a cat or a mouse, right? I think that this idea that they have people in mascot costumes working at as sign spinners or as hosts at amusement parks or whatever. That's a different sort of a thing than somebody who believes that that's part of their life, or somebody that thinks that this Uncle Scrooge adventures are the pinnacle of the comic book art form, right? So when it comes to that sort of thing, that's a separation from people that are feel awkward or embarrassed by funny animal books because they have a connotation. The connotation is not that Uncle Scrooge Adventures are really great. Nobody is going to argue that funny animal comics aren't appropriate because Uncle Scrooge Adventures are great, but they may argue that funny animal comics don't have a place because furries ruin everything. To quote Jim Tooner from earlier,
And he's right.
so
I think.
once
If
again,
nobody
that
else has something
depends
to
on
say-
part of how we're using it, but the question to bring up here, right? That is specifically is: do you guys on the panel think that any portion of the significant downturn in the modern popularity of funny animal books, do you guys think any of that has to do with this stigma around perceived or real opinions of the furry community?
I know that I personally have been no stranger to, and you can see my artwork right down there in my what's it called, thumbnail. Have been no stranger to accusations of these characters being furries, including that from Twitless himself. I know he was just joshing me, but still.
It still happened to hurt just a little.
Yeah, there's always going to be some people, and I've literally had a conversation with someone on Facebook who very specifically, his definition of a furry was literally any anthropomorphic animal whatsoever. And I don't think that was as a derogatory term because they considered themselves a furry themselves or to do furry artwork. Again, I would like to keep those definitions separate as much as possible. Otherwise, it starts getting fuzzy.
Well, honestly, again, it goes right back. Never mind. I don't want to belabor the point. Larry was going to bring up Robert Crumb, and I kind of don't want him to bring up Robert Crumb because
I'm actually
I hate
not
Robert
going to.
Crumb.
I'm not going to bring up Robert Crumb per se, but Crumb is tangential to this. Crumb created Fritz the Cat, which became a exceedingly popular X-rated movie in the early 1970s, when X-rated movies could be popular. So Ralph Bakshi, one of the great lights in the history of animation, made a X-rated Fritz the Cat movie, which in 1972 made $25 million worldwide.
I did not realize it was successful.
On a production budget of $700,000. So this occurred in the early 70s. So
1972 money. Comics were like 40 cents.
Yeah. So Fritz, as a majorly culturally significant thing that occurred in the early 70s, is directly connected, I feel, to how comic artists in the 80s and 90s who are just getting started might have felt uncomfortable associating themselves with funny animals.
And that would also explain why most funny animal strips in the 80s and 90s were similar to the Garfield format, where it's a couple of animals and a human.
Right.
Like you have Garfield and Get Fuzzy and Calvin and Hobbes and I guess all of the characters in Pearls Before Swine are animals, but they're barely animals. But yeah, that's an interesting perspective that I had not stopped to think about.
It is, especially when you consider that, and again, people will call things, furries if they want to, but I think when most of us in modern day think about what we consider modern furry art, I don't think we would ever think of the visuals behind Fritz the Cat. I personally just see that as another cartoon animal.
No, Disney had a much larger impact on modern. All the furry characters have Disney eyes.
So, no, I'm saying it makes sense that people, especially, can you imagine if like Deadpool, some parent let their kids go to see Fritz the Cat, not realizing what it was, ignored the X rating or something? I could see it having suddenly a big impact on people's, understanding. They see any cartoon animal anywhere, then suddenly they're like, "Uh-oh, now what am I supposed to think of this?"
I don't know if we should. I don't know. That might be going too far and overstating the significance of Fritz. It made a splash. But I don't think it was like a cultural signpost.
Well, it was. They had reviews of it in the New York Times. The New York Times did a review of the movie.
Now the success of I was watching a bit of a thing on Bocce, of a documentary on it, and Fritz both made and hurt his like career a lot. It opened up the doors for him to do other adult themed, and I don't necessarily mean like pornographic adult, but I mean like
Wizards, I think it was that weird post-apocalyptic thing.
Yeah, that's what
and he did one that was like a
They did Fire
it was
and
like
Ice.
Grease. It was a 50s gangster story. Can't remember what it's called right now.
Overall, I'd really not I'd like to.
But yeah, but it's just I'm just saying it's like, but
Forever.
also I mean like in other avenues there were projects that couldn't get funded. Bosch couldn't get funded because of the impact that Fritz had. Because
That is
a
a tragedy because
surprised.
Bakshi is a treasure.
no doubt. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. It's just one of those like that was an issue with it. I mean, it both did big and small things for him, but
Curse you, Robert Crumb.
yeah.
It was Bakshi who decided to do it.
I get it, but I'll still blame Crumb because he's a degenerate, and I feel I don't feel any guilt about putting him
Cursing
on blast.
Robert Crow.
Yeah.
Anyway,
my.
so
I think this is a good transition to talk about something.
My Little Pony.
Oh, I actually did have an
No,
anecdote
no.
related to
Yeah,
that
I think-
topic. The question that was asked.
metal
It's
specifically.
a personal anecdote, just real quick. So if you actually see the character that's in my webcam right now, back in late 2017, I think. Yeah. I was actually running a Kickstarter for a book called The Outstanding Jackrabbit. It was a story about, it's kind of like a mix between like a speedster superhero and a magical girl. And a cheerleader got into a bus accident. She woke up the only person alive, and she eventually realizes that she has these powers that to help people, but she's also like transformed into a bunny girl against her will, and the old bunny follows her around and stuff like that, like a familiar. And I was making this book. It was a very fun little like origin story adventure thing. And oddly enough, back at that time, the only person that was willing to put my thing out for advertising to get attention was Bleeding Cool, of all places. And I had very mixed responses of people who didn't want anything to do with it because they thought it was a furry story. Even though I had to explain, it's like, no, it's absolutely nothing like that. It's just an anthropomorphic person. I like break the story down. It's like, oh, this is pretty cool. But like, you have to fight against people and let them know what the story's about because they just see an anthropomorphic bunny girl and they're like, no, this is trash. Get it out of my face. But then also I had to explain to somebody who was a furry that it wasn't a furry book because he's like, it was a dude I knew from high school. It's like, I'm going to go and let everybody in my furry community know about this. It's like, I mean, you can, but just let them know it's not a furry book. Like, I don't care why you like the book. I just want to make sure your expectations are proper about it. And it was just a mess because of that whole stigma that if it's like an anthropomorphic animal person, it's a furry book, like period. And it is hard to navigate and work with people because you find yourself having to talk to almost everyone individually.
So Jim Turner is really right here when he says what furries do is poison the well anytime anything funny animal is made. And then let me point out, right, he's talking about fan furry there, as opposed to furry art. Even if something is created normally, they rush in and become the loudest fans of it. And then, in our minds, we all go nuts because we freak out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is it the furry or is it us?
I think it's a little bit both, but yes, it's definitely it definitely has to do with our perception of furry art and furries as a fandom.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm okay with this being kind of where we ended up because the question was what killed the funny animal comic, and we've ended up at furries did it.
Yeah.
And,
I'm satisfied with that. Yeah,
I'm satisfied with this answer.
I think this is the perfect transition, if I may, to talk a little bit about the sliding scale of anthropomorphism.
Oh my
well,
gosh.
now.
If
That's
I
a whole
could get
different
that up
topic.
there.
Do you have you used to say we pull up one of Scott McCloud's triangles?
Oh my
Pyramids?
god! Don't even. I can't even. I
It'll
can't.
be a quick presentation, but I think it's kind of important, especially when you're talking about the world building of an IP, to get down a certain line we're about to cross in a minute here. Technically, anthropomorphic basically just means you do anything, even the smallest bit, to humanize an animal, right? So all these animals are examples, like they are all on all fours, they live out in the forest like animals, they are pets. The only thing that really makes them anthropomorphic is that they have been given personalities, they can talk in most cases, right? On the very lowest part of the scale, that alone is enough to call something anthropomorphic. But I think we all know what we really mean when we talk about anthropomorphic animals. We're talking about humanoid animals. Creatures that stand on two legs and attempt to simulate having the head on the top of the torso, etc., be able to act and think and work like humans.
Nice use of illuminated manuscripts to drive your point home.
Uh-huh.
I like
Yep,
it.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. A little classic there.
Often they wear clothes or partly clothed. They can live in homes. Even when they're not, though, they are still, there are many, many examples of where they have been almost treated as if they were a human themselves. They just happen to live out in the forest or the desert or something. Then now you'll notice in all these examples, Alvin and the Chipmunks is photorealism. Again, these animals, rabbits here, are pretty much, I mean, they're just rabbits who have been stood up on their hind legs. For the most part, same with all of these, right? These are all mostly, except for the two top ones here, very old images, because for a long time, when people first started anthropomorphizing animals in mainstream, that's basically what they did. They were the original funny animals. I think kids just got a laugh out of seeing a pig in a suit, right? And so that's all it was. Stand a pig up, put a suit on it, boom, anthropomorphic animal. But then later on, we figured out how to cartoon them more and stylize the visuals until you could take those details and make them your own. But eventually, you're going to get to a point where something is so cartoony and so stylized. I call it balloon animals because it's almost like you just have this big group of bubbles and shapes and you color it. And if Tony the Tiger here was not orange with stripes, would you really recognize him specifically as a tiger? Or would you even recognize it as a cat? Maybe because of the ears. I don't know. Those could be mouse ears, right? And this is a kind of weird middle ground. Because if you go any farther than this, what we end up with is that's what I call anthros. Meaning that you've crossed the line to where, take a look at Sonic here. Could anyone ever say that actually looks anything like a hedgehog in real life?
No.
Right. Sonic has been given what are called rubber hose arms and legs. It's an early thing from back in the days of Mickey Mouse, where you've basically just got these cylinders for torso and for legs and arms. They can actually wobble like a rubber hose. They're basically glorified stick figures. And then you take a head that looks something like the animal and you plop it on top. If you saw this walking down the street, there's no way you could say that, like Porky Pig here, you could say, well, that's a cartoony version of an animal standing on two legs. Sonic here is like an alien hedgehog person from another planet. And in fact, you'll notice
he is an alien hedgehog
in the
person
movie. Yes, in the movie, that's exactly what they did. They just called him an alien, right? Said, you're from another universe. You don't belong on Earth. And any farther beyond this line, you have crossed into a section where you can no longer say these are just animals who we're doing funny things with. These are now, in fact, a new type of creature that exists separate from humans, but separate from whatever animal it's supposed to be at the same time, right? And many of them do live in their own universes, Star Fox, Mickey, where it's like this animal, this universe is entirely comprised of these creatures. Sometimes they may share a world with humans, but they're just a normal part of life. And we have to see them not as animals anymore, but as this other thing that really has no good definition. I just like to call it anthros. And of course, you can take that idea. They don't have to be stick figure arms and legs. You can do anything with them as long as it no longer looks like the real animal. I think this, category qualifies, but you can make it more human-like, and you can go more realistic and keep going on and on and on until eventually, until eventually you get what I call the alien cat person, where, Khajiit is one of my favorite examples. At this point, the body is so humanly realistic, and in this case, also the head so animally realistic. It's like basically you took a human body with fur and you plopped the animal's head on it, right? That this is an animal that seems human-like. It's more like it's a person who seems animal-like, right?
Mhm.
And of course, there might be one other category after that, but
The best category.
why is any of this important?
That's
Well,
an excellent question. There,
because because of this. I'm going to let you take a moment to take this into your mind here as you realize what is happening. You are seeing this, guys, right? I moved that over. Oh, no, you're not seeing the same thing. Why am I not? Oh, I've moved into the wrong category. Oh, it just keeps copying it. Okay, there we go. Yeah. One of the most infamous pictures passing around the internet right now. We have here is a clear, it's obviously done as a joke, but in doing so, they have made a clear definition between one type of mouse and another very, very different type of mouse. Right?
Our Spiegelman
To
does
be
it
fair,
too.
that definition was always there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, once
No,
you have
but they have
Goofy,
acknowledged
no.
it. They have acknowledged it in this universe, right?
right. But I'm saying, like, it's always was the case because you have Donald Duck's best friend is Goofy, and man's best friend is Pluto.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
have the same head.
And you know what? I can't count the number of times that Donald Duck has eaten poultry. Mickey went moose hunting. Donald got a camera and was photographing songbirds in their nests. And what you end up with in the Mickey universe and a couple others, Sonic you could make the argument for this, is a universe where there is a clear distinction between humans, or at least what passes as humans in the Mickey universe, animals, and then somewhere in there are these anthro characters who are a third category.
Well, that exists within Narnia too. The animals that can speak have a different
Yes.
nature than the animals that cannot speak.
Now, visually, artistically, those animals would definitely not fit within that anthro category that I showed, though, right? Those are still on that concept. They basically just stand them up on two legs. But you are right in that there is at least a mental difference. But you can go much farther and you can create an entire physiological difference. And when you do that, every artist, their universe that they're creating is going to be affected by how they see their characters. In fact, this might even be the perfect time to talk about Pogo if you want to bring that up, Twitless. Because the kind of jokes you're going to do, the kind of storytelling you're going to do is all going to be, it's all going to surround what these characters actually mean to you as you look at them as quote unquote animals. Ray Tortex says Sonic definitely has at least animals.
Yep. They're all in the it's not. Yeah. It's not just. It's all the way back to Sonic 1.
So
Yeah.
Every
Well,
time
that's
you
right,
defeat
right, there's
every
the
time you defeat an
flickies.
enemy, an animal. No,
I
no.
can also accurately answer that Oolong question from Dragon Ball. He would be in that last category of quote unquote alien animal people. He's very much supposed to be a person. He's a mock on the pig face monk. And even though he looks cartoon, it's just because that's how people that height in Dragon Ball look like physically. He is otherwise completely normal with shape-shifting powers.
I don't know about everybody else. I am unfamiliar with this character. Can we get a picture up?
Yeah, he's from the he was in Z later, but he's from like the earlier parts
That's
of
the one
Dragon
that's just like
Ball.
Porky Pig, right?
He has human characteristics, but his face is pig-like, so he's got pig ears and a pig nose. But other than that, he's kind of completely normal to the style of Dragon Ball. He often wears clothes like a person, right? He's got human hands, and he is otherwise just a person.
I also remember him liking hats.
He's
Yes,
got to be based off.
And panties.
He-
He really likes panties.
He looks like Porky Pig. Yeah,
He's got to be based off Piggly or whatever his name is from Journey to the West.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's
yeah,
a pig face
yeah.
monk. That's
Dragon
all
Ball
he's
is just
supposed
Journey
to
to
be.
the West with
Gotcha.
amped up to 9,000.
basically Krillin, but with pig features.
Yeah, but he is otherwise just a person aside from his face. So he would fall in that very second to last category because
Right.
cat girls were their own thing.
Yeah.
If cat girls are their own.
I was the opposite extreme of animals that can just talk.
But he could also be anything, like a giant bull or whatever. He has shape-shifting powers, so he's a
Gotcha.
weird thing.
But now that we've circled around to Dragon Ball a little bit in this, I gotta wonder if
Their
maybe
president's a dog.
I gotta wonder if maybe coming back to this, why the funny animal stuff is now starting to come back, is because of the popularity of anime and manga using animals as a medium.
I was going to say this back when someone mentioned Usagi Yojimbo, because you're right. In almost every anime, especially if it's an action anime, especially, or even though it may be 99% humans, there's always at least that one or two talking anthropomorphic characters of some sort. Some of them may not even be animals. Sometimes they're just weird lumps of color and stuff. But they love throwing those weird alternate little characters in there. And as far as I know, they rarely give an actual explanation of why they're there. They just like them being a character.
Well, that makes a
I
lot
mean-
more sense if you know the history of Shintoism and
probably.
like how different like yokai and stuff interacted with the world, like Tamikis and things like that.
I know
There's
what
a
you're
lot of
talking
just
about.
yeah, like it makes sense in the context of Japanese history.
That's interesting.
But my thesis is that the rise and fall, and now rising again, of funny animals is directly related to the influences on the artists. And we are seeing it somewhat coming back now after anime and manga has made a influence on a generation of artists as well as webcomics.
I think that's probably a fair assessment, honestly.
Well, and now that's an interesting thing.
The way I would phrase it, if I can cut in for a second, the way I would phrase it is that because the conversation about what killed X in comics is an interesting one, but there's several other genres that we could discuss, right? What killed the Western? What killed the romance? Blah 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 blah. And the thing is that a big answer, it's not that, oh, wow, people stopped being interested in romance. It's the fact that comics used to be a medium that did not have to compete with other mediums. Right. So like women who were largely, I would say predominantly, consumers of romance, suddenly we had radio, you have radio. And then after radio, you had television. Television is huge. It impacts a lot of things. And when you can get a certain content, so it's like, it's not like romance didn't die. It's just people are like, I don't need this in comics anymore. I'm getting it from somewhere else. And for
even some of that too, like teen romance stuff. Back in when I was young, you had the Babysitters Club books that was a huge aspect of that it marketed to the teen romance crowd. They make now today, because manga has some of the same stuff on it, Babysitters Club stuff are graphic novels. So it's using the brand name that people's moms recognize, that girls' moms recognize, to sell them a product that the girls' moms never would have bought.
True. It's definitely a culture thing, right? Because if you look at, like, say, Japan, they have a very thriving, mostly magazine, but people do get like the taco and stuff like that, the volumes and otherwise. But they have a very thriving culture of buying manga, and that's why there's a whole bunch of different genres that fit all the different things for different people. We don't really have a comic buying culture here in America anymore, and that's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's huge.
Okay, so this just got really interesting.
But so to for me to, if I could just
go ahead.
Finish there. So I would say, it's not that people had lost interest in funny cartoon animals. They got them from different places.
Right.
So it's like a lot of kids could still get for free. Like I didn't have to spend money to read the Sunday comics, and where a lot of people read the Sunday comics. They get tons of funny animals there. And then you can just turn on your television set for free, get funny animals there. And then occasionally your mom and dad took you to the movie theater and you saw funny animals on the big screen from Disney. So the need for, I have to also go and get a floppy comic doesn't exist in the same way. So the funny animal content is still very popular. And then obviously as technology continued to increase, now webcomics are there and they're largely free. And so suddenly, you see that. So it's how the content changes form, and finds new channels and mediums that will best suit it.
It's a delivery mechanism, just like Amazon delivering all your stuff to you.
Yeah.
But Twetless, what do you think about my thesis about it being influenced in part by how creatives perceive the medium?
That's big, and that goes, as Metal pointed out, whether people want to admit it or not. American media is very largely still influenced by a legacy of Puritanism. And it basically kind of, it's trickled down, and we've definitely drifted very far away from that. But the role of the image in society, and the role of text, and the role of the cartoon, I think played a huge role. And it's why cartoons tend to be viewed as things either for children, or you have The Simpsons, and there's not a ton of middle ground. Whereas in an Eastern tradition that evolved from a very different philosophical set of underpinnings, you get a very different treatment of images and cartooning as a result.
So
I think I got to point out again that dichotomy in early American cartooning between the highbrow, James Thurber style, Charles Adams style cartooning, and the lowbrow, funny books.
Yeah.
And I think that's a factor in all of that too, which is why I think that Scholastic's move toward graphic mediums in the last 20 years is sort of frustrating, because they were one of the big people to push that dichotomy of education doesn't belong to the lowbrow art for up until the day they started selling their own comics.
Yeah. Well, I think actually that dichotomy in America is part of the biggest poison, is that there are kid stuff and then there's serious stuff and stuff. Like, it goes all the way back compared to like Japan, where they don't even really separate by genre as much. It is more about target demographic, right? So people don't look at you less for reading things for younger ages, but there are things that are usually like age appropriate. So it breaks down like what boys like at this age range, what girls like at this age range, and that's how they do their marketing. They kind of have like more of a respect for the medium as a whole, while we have things like, no, that's kid stuff, get it away from us.
Right. If you want to get real weird with it, this goes all the way back to Plato, like the foundations of Western civ, and essentially the West. You go all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and they're like, images, man. Those things are lies. Like, it's basically Plato's the sophist, if I boil it down. And so like there's a suspicion. There's a suspicion towards the image, and when you get to the underpinnings of American society, the image is for children, and it's meant to help you get to the real truth, which is in text. And so and that's kind of like that's Western civ for you, and so there's
which is yet another thing that Diogenes called Plato out on.
Also,
Well, that's one of
there's
the interesting.
examples. Pardon me. There's examples from early stonemasons during the Gothic era in the churches where they would carve in body animal images to mock the church. So
Yeah.
funny animals have been associated with sticking the thumb up at authority.
But now, what
Right.
about something like Aesop's Fables, where they're actually being used as parables?
Right, and you
Well,
do
we're
have
talking, yeah, but that's
that-
oral history. That's
yeah, and that-
Yeah, that's closer to the text than it is to image.
Yeah.
well,
you
and
know?
even then you're looking at like oral history falls into. I mean, because like in Western Civ, image has there's Eastern versus Western ideas even within the church. One of the differences between the
iconoclast
liturgies of
the iconoclast war between the Orthodox and the
exactly.
Right.
And the idea that we can use pictures to remind us of the family, and it's like they're idols. Well, maybe you're both right. that's where I come down on the subject, in case you wondered.
Yeah, and then you look at just like almost all Eastern religions, how they branched off and stuff. A lot of them still had animals heavily in their spiritual form. Like in
That is
Hindu,
true.
there's an elephant god still, to this very
Mhm.
day. And you see it all across the whole Eastern area. They have a very different view of these type of things than we do.
Okay, so all of this is so interesting. It's all coming together into one idea here for me, and that is, Twitless, if comics gave way to a new media because it offered something that they didn't have before, what is the new media we have now? Because we
Is that
have
a-
one.
It's a rhetorical question, or
It's video games.
okay.
And in the
Well, actually,
early-
it's even further than that. It's the internet,
well,
which
right.
connects all these medias as a form
Yeah,
of media
yeah.
in itself.
But in the early days of video games, you may recall there were a ton of cartoon animal and other types of creatures sometimes who always ended up becoming the main playable characters in those games. So,
Yeah,
getting
mascot
back
games.
to
Yeah.
this idea that Eastern stuff is actually maybe making this popular again, and at the forefront of possibly both of those, you have not only the Sonic games, but the Sonic characters, and as a result, over 9,000 Sonic fan characters.
Do not steal.
Could
Yeah, where's
this
Cold Steel? I don't see him there.
Yeah,
He should
Cold
be-
Steel's the only one that actually exists.
Yeah, like he should be.
Yeah.
He should be the first listing on that. I'm very
Nothing personnel, kid.
very disappointed in this search algorithm. If Cold Steel
DuckDuckGo
isn't,
doesn't work like Google. But the point is, could this be a potential road back?
where the hell is Sonic
Perhaps-
Shoe? Like, come on.
Well, I think you're definitely. I think that's definitely an aspect on it. I think that that just like with you guys, Sonic fan creations have spurred a lot of people into their own comics. I think that was one of the things one of the things I'd really like to cover over Christmas break is I've been wanting to do this for a couple of years, and I think that we just need to commit to it over Christmas break to have the read through of Tales Gets Trolled. I think that needs to happen this December.
Yeah, like I said, it might be a little bit of an ask, but I do know people who work on the team. I might be able to pressure one of them onto an episode sometime.
Cybershell got a whole interview, I think, with Laserbot once, so I know
That'd be fun.
he's
That'd be
you know.
fun. But with that, I think that and I think that the Dave Pilkey connection, I don't think you can undersell that about the what that guy has done to introduce comics to and they're not going to the comics that I read as a kid. When they're growing out of Captain Underpants and Dogman, they're not signing up for Captain Marvel, and Batman and Aquaman, but they still are. These people are reading comics, and some of them are going to be creating comics, and I think that's my kid cut his teeth on Captain Underpants, and he hasn't stopped drawing comics since he was 6.
Well, I think it's also part of like why my initial question at the start was like, did they have a demise? And I think it's partially because I mostly read manga and web comics these days, and you just have a plethora of them in both of those categories, especially the web comic.
And
I
as you
remember
said, the
reading VG
internet.
Cats growing up,
Yeah. I think it's just a situation where the traditional American comic market, like they walked away from the whole, genre, and I don't think there's any way back for those guys.
But if we do look at the internet and stuff, and it seems a lot of anthropomorphic animals are stuck right now, referring, by the way, to the art, on either furries or Sonic fan characters. But just because it's just like anime, right? People get an art style gets popular, everybody jumps on it for the longest time.
Mhm.
Do you think, though, that there might be a way out of that moving forward where either or both could actually generate interest in new material as whatever new media
I think that's
starts to
also
come
just
along?
a survivorship bias too, because there are quite a few very popular ones that aren't in either of those styles. Like Gamer Cat is just like they're like balloon cats, like go into your balloon animal thing.
Right.
There's quite a few popular ones that aren't. I think a lot of people make things that don't make it right. Like they'll go like a chapter or whatever, and nobody's reading it, and they just drop it. But because the Sonic-esque characters and all of the furry stuff is easily recognizable by already built up communities that are very niche and they want to support everything they see, those things tend to last a bit longer.
Right.
And only like the really successful ones that don't fall in that category, the ones that end up standing out.
Well, and I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, getting the product right. It's just like with the somebody in the chat mentioned the bad guys, right? Which is, it crosses the line between picture book and comic, right? It's mostly a picture book, but they do use sequential art in some of the stuff.
Right.
But it's got its own unique look to it. Dogman's got its own unique look to it. But those have both been able to become very popular because not because of their style, but because of their content. And so it's like that. It's like Matt Krotz on Twitter asked today. I think it was Matt Krotz. So do people buy comics these days for the art or the story? And somebody said issue 1 is for the art, issue 2 is for the story.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
much. You won't
yeah.
get me to buy it again if the story's not compelling enough.
Right. And what I think that's a big factor. I think so you get people that like their buddy said Dogman's really funny or whatever. And so the art gets a following or a fan base, not for the sake of the art, but that's what may be an initial point of contact. But it's the content itself that gets its own endearment with it. And
But
I
so
think
that's my question, though, is as the say take the Sonic fan characters as content, as what you might refer to as kind of a river that has flowed into a dammed up lake and it's not letting anything out, right? Just growing bigger and bigger. Do you think that there's a point, is it just stays that way forever? Or is there a point where the dam breaks and starts unleashing a torrent of all kinds of new things?
I'm not sure that it is that. I think that it is so damned up. I think it's just, I think that maybe it seems that way for you because you had a Sonic fan.
Well, no, because like you said, both that and the furry thing are massive communities.
They are massive communities. That's true.
They are for a reason. But is it possible that with new media, they could actually be the forefront, especially what, like we were saying, that Sonic is still like the one animal comic that is still running strong after all this time? Could it be the gateway for things to come back?
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
Sonic is definitely
I don't know.
a
I
gateway
think that's a
drug.
weird paradigm to look at it through.
Yeah, and it is a very. I mean, the question is reliant upon a very comic book shop way of looking at things. But I don't necessarily. I think that if you're looking at the American comic book shop perspective, I think you could have a real point at which, because I mean, like for example, it's not running anymore. But the My Little Pony comic that was running, which I think probably qualifies as a funny animal book, or next door to it. It was wildly popular while the show was still running. I mean, like that was a good selling comic up until the show like stopped being on there anymore.
And that often happens nowadays, like those big three that cartoons tend to generate comics.
Yep. Yep. And
Yeah,
so
and
I
there's a
think
lot
that,
of My Little Pony fan comics and stories out there too that are still generating in very
yeah,
much the same type
true.
of way that Sonic is.
yeah, definitely.
And that is a thing that did not always exist, I must point out, is fan comics.
Mhm.
Nowadays, for just about anything that can exist in a normal comic, you will have many, many iterations brought out by the fans, even much longer after it has passed.
Yeah, and I think that you can blame the internet for that and a
Mm-hmm.
combination of Japan
Right.
because Japan actually has the doujinshi, the self-published work, which
Yeah.
as long as you're not you're not doing it commercially, like a private person can sell it at conventions, you actually can just
Oh.
make fan stories of things. So that's kind of just like a culture there that ended up bleeding elsewhere.
Well, Wilford Brimley, I think, gives us the closing
Uh-oh.
note to the show. My little bronies killed funny animals. It may be,
That's fair.
although
It's fair.
maybe they're not dead, and maybe they will continue to live on forever, as long as we keep speaking English, maybe even longer than that.
Go back to speaking Egyptian. That's where the funny animal stuff began.
Well, I mean, also if you look at funny animals as an extension of the fairy stories, the fairy
Mhm.
stories are how the old Celtic and Germanic gods were hidden after people got religion.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, I think there's, yeah, definitely an aspect about that too. But it was Mickey Mouse forever.
I said he went moose hunting.
Well, I think there is a character Mickey Mouse. I think that's a
Oh,
real.
I gotcha.
I think it's a Canadian parody. I think I've seen that somewhere.
Mickey
And
joined the French Foreign Legion once.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
hunting Arabs in the desert. it's ridiculous.
We need to have them on with Captain Canada.
There you go. Well, guys, I think we've said all there is to say. What do you guys think? Call it a show.
I think so. You want to start plugging stuff?
So, yeah, sure, go for it. Why don't you start since you brought it up?
I'll start. Yes, definitely. I'm putting it up here because I have, just for the occasion, I am working on both a comic and a game in one.
What?
And it specifically tries to emulate some of that old 1960s retro, 60s, 70s, Hanna-Barbera, Pink Panther, etc. style of cartoon animals. There's a little bit of Sonic the Hedgehog in there because it does, that is a big influence for me. But the idea is we're going back to that old retro time period and exploring this is basically my version of Bendy and the Ink Machine in a slightly different time era.
Related to that, my mom caught me watching the Cuphead cartoon on Netflix, and she appreciated how true to the retro formula Cuphead
it was amazing. Both that and the game, they are a piece of artwork.
So I think there could be a space for that, for video games and comics that are true to the retro formula but are also fresh.
That I absolutely believe in, and I think you could probably find a dozen minimum different time periods that you could use. So yeah, I've got the link in there to follow me. I will be releasing the demo for it fairly soon. I'm about 2/3 of the way finished at this point. Taking me way longer than it should.
Yeah, I've tried out parts of it. It's got a very interesting blend of things going on in it. So it's got the point and click adventure aspect going on, and then it'll kind of take breaks and do kind of sequential art, kind of comic storytelling, and then animations as well. He's put it's definitely a labor of love. Put a lot of effort into it.
Thank you.
That's the link you put in the private chat, right?
That is true. Yes.
Because I dropped that into the general chat.
Thank you.
Excellent.
We just need to crowdfund a better laptop because the thing keeps freezing up.
I know. The annoying thing is when you're working with, I want to, and as soon as this is done, I will be getting rid of it. But the problem is when you're working with game software, it's a problem to try to keep up with the updates. You want to finish it on the same version of the game software that you started it on. So I've got to get the darn thing finished before I can move on.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Cartoonicus. Twitless, what do you got
Thank
to talk to us about today?
We had a very short break on Super Schooled, but we should be getting more strips up pretty shortly. So check out Super Schooled.
My apologies for that, everybody. I moved.
Hint, hint, hint. No, I'm kidding.
I was out for several weeks trying to get out of that house in time.
No. Like, it's completely understandable. And I have had some very frustrating delays. I literally have issues not just one. I have like 3 issues of Omega Girl essentially completed. And I have the copies in my hand, but the site that I use for distribution is taking absolutely forever.
Is this for digital distribution or paper distribution?
Both. Yeah. There's been so many paper shortages and problems.
It's not exclusive, right? I mean, you could drop the digitals on Gumroad or something, right?
I probably I kind of want I like having it on one site, and I like not having.
Well, 2010 was a good year. I can give you that.
It's not taking me that long.
No, I'm saying that I'm having to realize that paradigm is a thing of the past.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna take a little time, see if I need to start putting it on find other ways. At this point, I could probably just order a bunch of copies, because and then just like have people mail me that you want one, and I'll mail one to you or something. So like that's an option too. So I have 3 issues completed. I sent you a digital copy.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Because I'm a bad friend.
Yeah, it's just terrible. But you can feel free to check out issue 1 in anticipation of issues 2 and 3 coming out. So
issue 1, by the way, excellent.
Thank you.
Very good.
I'll post a link in chat. Yeah. So yeah, check out Super School, check out Adventures of Omega Girl, and I've got other projects in the pipeline. I'm working on potentially releasing a new superhero in addition to Omega Girl. I'm hoping to maybe get that started next year. So really excited to show you new stuff.
Cool. How about you, Larry? What you up to?
Working on the 3rd draft of Solid State. Matt and I are getting pages into the hand of the artist. Unfortunately, a little thing called Hurricane Ian kind of threw a wrench into the production chain, and Matt's latest Kyrie has taken the front seat on his efforts. So it's still going into production, and we're going to be getting that out soon and be asking people for money to get that comic fully distributed and released.
Cool. So up for following you updates, is that going to be following you on Twitter? Is that the best way?
Following me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, and getting onto Matt's mailing list would be the best way to get that pipeline.
So, excellent. I'm gonna. It doesn't have your name on this format. If I do this, there it comes up. So there's his Twitter handle up there, everybody. Get out your pencils and write your little notes like some ancient people, and follow Larry on Twitter.
And I did not expect this topic of conversation to be as deep and intellectual as it got.
I knew it would be big.
It happens
There were
here.
A lot of parts to it.
Well, I can't vouch for the intellectual content, but there certainly was content, and I'm glad for that. Metal, what do you been doing lately?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So
wait, I'm sorry, Metal. I gotta interrupt you for a second because I gotta clarify something. I don't want to leave it hanging. I don't forget. I was talking. I don't want to be insult. I was not trying to be insulting. I was making a joke. Cartoonicus, you put a lot of effort into your slideshow, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I wish I'd have known. I wish I'd have known in the first 15 minutes, because I think it would have fit a little better at the very beginning. But I mean, it's still there and it's good stuff. And I appreciate you putting the effort into there.
You need to put the TED Talk logo on the front.
I got to admit, though, I don't remember what joke you made.
I was talking about the intellectual content, I couldn't vouch for it. But I was like, wait a second. Twitless put serious work into this, and not Twitless Cartoon.
I did. I put a lot of work into it.
Yeah. I always wanted to talk more about Pogo because I want to know more. But
Yeah,
we'll
I'm
save that for the
surprised
show.
after all that we never talked about Pogo.
Yeah, it's okay.
We'll have to have a Pogo night.
This is Wilford Brimley's dropping secrets in the chat. 100% secrets.
Oh,
Go back
that's a secret. How dare you expose Matt C's baldness like that? Oh, how could you? Shame, for shame. Matt C is not completely 100% bald. It's closer to like 98%.
I was going to say 7, but sure. Next thing he's going to mention is he's going to spill the beans on my psoriasis. Okay, Twitless. I mean, not Twitless, the metal. I suck tonight.
Yes. Hey. Yeah. So, still going through a little bit of issues, but I'm moving along. I'm doing things. At the moment, I am focusing on volume 1 of On Tour with Mitch and Sandy, which is the background image I have for my webcam right now. Just a little preview of the front cover for the volume. And for people who don't know what that is, it's a story about 2 sisters who have a garage band that kind of blow up overnight, and they try to be very successful with it, but they end up getting the music industry mad at them, and they send their top talent to take them out. It's going to be a fun story. I'm probably also going to jump between that and Realms and Relics again as I put it out, so you'll be able to find all that stuff at xdynamischaos.com or any of the other places that I mirror my stuff. I think it's going to be fun.
So when you say take them out, do you mean like assassin style?
Yes, like physical combat. With parodies of actual music bands. I've already done 2 shorts with the characters that are done in a slightly more animation, like the Deke House style back in the day. But this I'm doing closer to Rumiko Takahashi, who is my favorite comic creator. You can check out those 2 shorts. The first one, they fight a parody of the Backstreet Boys called The Alley Adolescents, which is pretty fun. And one of the recurring characters who's a fictional part of the world shows up. Lainey Lynn was in the second short, and she's also the main antagonist in the first volume. But there is an opening act, and they have to fight a parody of the band Less Than Jake in there too that I call More Than Drake. So it'll be fun.
Did you ever see the anime / Japanese movie DMC?
Yes.
So like
I did.
you told me this story. I
actually
was like,
re-watched that with a group of people in a Discord earlier this year.
it's so great. And have you actually watched the live action movie too of it?
No, I haven't yet. It's on my list of things to watch. But I would say for style of like both humor and storytelling, it's kind of the cartoon Hi Puffy Yami Yumi show meets Scott Pilgrim. I think it was a pretty good way to show off what type of writing and stuff I'm going to do in there.
That's hilarious. Ridiculous, but hilarious.
And you can find it all at xdynamischaos.com.
Which I don't have a tag to, so eventually I need to go back through and put people's links into the descriptions, but I have been I've not been good about that since I started the show back up, actually. So
that's what we're here for.
So but yeah,
we
also from
Super Schooled has its own funny animal character that we added in there.
Oh gosh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
We have so many characters, I sometimes forget them.
Sometimes.
Well, it is true. It is true that I am just a beard. Actually, I have much less beard than I did a few months ago, but it's coming back. I need to deal with that. But yeah. So anyhow, the as far as that comes to myself on things, and I have, of course, a little website called idealcomics.net, which you can check out. It's kind of a hub for all of our stuff. But I'm working with Mrs. H on a weekly web comic that is spinning out from our Forces Good and Evil. It's the senior year for those guys. Current story is called Homecoming Girls Night. and that is up every Friday. Forces Friday up on Webtoon, and whatnot. So, that's what I've been up to. Also on Mondays, idealcomics.net, we are publishing 7 strips throughout the 3 are already up. We've got 4 throughout the rest of the month that are funny animal strips featuring Grabbit, the rabbit superhero. So there you have it. One final note: Edming asked earlier, when is the magazine coming? And not before December. probably looking at the spring. If I have anything to say about it.
Yeah. I was gonna say there's still some. We'll figure something out.
Yeah,
but
Yes,
it's
for
probably
the
gonna.
love of all things holy, not before December.
Yeah, it
No,
may be a
not
bad
even.
time to start a project like this before the holidays. It might
Yeah,
be
but
kind of a New Year's thing, but
we've actually got several of your favorite gutter artists that are interested in participating, but everybody's is neck deep in stuff right now. So
Hey, it's
probably
perfect for you. My mind's always in the gutter.
oh,
so we'll probably be looking at making announcements in first quarter. Be looking at a second quarter release would be my guess on all of that. Late second quarter. But I'm also really biased because I graduate in May, so so I know what I've got going on, but I can't speak for everybody. But that's what I'm guessing.
well,
So.
shout out to Ed Ming in is Mad Love in chat for saying that he is the one reader of Super Schooled. So
Yeah.
Oh,
I haven't even finished it. So anyway, next week, I've got next week's show all figured out. We are going to be having, well, not all figured, but I know Dan Sakura is going to be there coming on. Nani or can't remember the dude's Nanji, the guy who does the Now It's My Turn little magical girl comic on Webtoons that I've been reading. Anyway, we are and a couple of the guys. Next week's topic is my mom/dad makes comics. We're talking about making comics as a parent, what that's like. So, yeah. So that's the topic. And not everybody on the panel will necessarily be a parent. So who knows what will happen? But
I mean, definitely not if I'm running production.
Yeah,
at least to my knowledge.
it's a parent. You're a parent.
it is apparent. My kids are all grown, but yeah, that's the topic for next week, and that's the show for this time. Thank you for tuning in, those who have. Thanks for coming. We have missed you, Wilfred, and that's the show. So good night, and until next time, keep reading comics. Bye.
Stay tuned.